The Velhari continuance had been mapping the galaxy for 11,000 years. Not exploring. Mapping. There is a difference that most younger civilizations never understand. Exploration implies uncertainty, the romantic idea that something unknown might be waiting beyond the next star. The Velhari had moved past that feeling so long ago that their historians had to search through 6 layers of archival translation just to find a word that once meant wonder. They had found it, catalogued it, and filed it under extinct emotional states, pre-unification era. Mapping, on the other hand, was precise. Mapping was the act of confirming what you already knew to be true and adding the coordinates to the Grand Continuance Registry, a living document so large that it had its own gravitational signature. Every star system, every debris field, every dead world, every sleeping giant of a gas planet with its moons counted, named, measured, and ranked by resource potential. The registry did not miss things. The registry had never missed anything. Senior cartographer Thessaly Vorn sat in her observation cradle aboard the Undying Meridian, a Velhari deep survey vessel roughly the size of a small moon, and stared at the signal repeating on her secondary console with the quiet intensity of someone who had just watched arithmetic fail in front of her eyes. The signal was coming from grid reference 7 Tau 19. Grid reference 7 Tau 19 was listed in the registry as an unremarkable trinary star system with 2 cold rocky planets, 1 ice giant, a scattered asteroid belt, and absolutely zero civilizational potential. It had been logged 4,200 years ago by the survey ship Pale Reckoning and rated Class 0, meaning nothing of interest would ever emerge there. But something was transmitting from it. Not a natural phenomenon. Natural phenomena did not transmit in structured pulses. Natural phenomena did not use a frequency band that the Velhari themselves had only developed access to 800 years ago. And natural phenomena. This was the part that made Thessaly's secondary circulatory organs squeeze tight in a way she hadn't felt since her first deep space posting. Natural phenomena did not include what appeared to be a greeting. She ran the translation buffer 3 times. It came back the same each time. Hello. We've been trying to reach you for a while. We weren't sure what frequency you were using, so we tried all of them. This is working, great. If not, well, we'll keep trying. Thessaly sat very still for a long moment. Then she opened a direct channel to Admiral Soreth Kane on the command deck and said, in the flattest voice she could manage, "Sir, I need you to look at something. I also need you to be sitting down when you look at it because I am sitting down and I still feel like I might fall." Admiral Soreth Kane was not a man who unsettled easily. He had overseen 14 contested space mediations, survived the breach of Karath Station, and once sat in a diplomatic chamber for 9 continuous hours while 2 warring civilizations screamed at each other in overlapping frequencies that physically vibrated his secondary ear membranes until they bled. He had not flinched. His subordinates admired him for it. His superiors trusted him because of it. He stood in front of Thessaly's console now and said nothing for a very long time. "Play it again," he said finally. She played it again. "Hello. We've been trying to reach you for a while. And this is coming from 7 Tau 19. "Yes, sir." "Which the registry classifies as Class 0. Uninhabited. Assessed 4,200 years ago. No reassessment flagged." Kane looked at the coordinates on the star chart. Then he looked at the signal analysis. Then he looked at the registry entry that Thessaly had pulled up alongside it, the dry, ancient notation from the Pale Reckoning survey, with its neat little 0 classification and its timestamp so old it predated half the current Velhari administrative districts. Could the Pale Reckoning have made an error? He asked. Thessaly had already thought about this. She had thought about it in the 40 seconds between first receiving the signal and calling Kane, and she had thought about it in the 4 minutes since, and the answer was the same each time. "The Pale Reckoning used standard deep survey protocols," she said carefully. "Those protocols check for electromagnetic activity, chemical biosignatures, gravitational anomalies, and spectral analysis of atmospheric composition. If they classified it as Class 0, then at the time of assessment, it was Class 0. "At the time of assessment," Kane repeated. 4,200 years ago." Another silence. Kane's face had the look of a man doing mathematics that he didn't like the answer to. "So in 4,000 years," he said slowly, "something went from nothing, no life, no signal, no civilization potential, to the ability to transmit on a frequency that we only developed access to 800 years ago. That is one reading of the data, sir." "What is the other reading?" Thessaly hesitated. "That the Pale Reckoning survey was wrong. That there was something there 4,000 years ago. Something that was already old enough to stay quiet." She paused. Something that was watching us survey them and chose not to say hello yet. Kane was quiet for a very long time after that. Then he said, "Get me intelligence. And get me the registry oversight board. And Thessaly," he stopped. "Don't log this yet. Don't enter it into the registry until I say." It was the first time in Thessaly's career, in anyone's career as far as she knew, that an admiral had ever told a cartographer to delay a registry entry. The registry was sacred. The registry was always current. The registry did not wait. She nodded anyway. The undying meridian adjusted course for 7 Tau 19 at a cautious survey speed. Not a defensive approach, not a full tactical formation, but not a casual drift either. Kane had chosen the middle option because he was a man who lived in middle options, and because nothing about this situation yet told him which extreme was appropriate. What they found 6 days later was not what anyone expected. 7 Tau 19's third planet, previously logged as a cold rocky body with a thin carbon dioxide atmosphere and no liquid surface water, was blue. Not metaphorically blue. Literally, visually, almost aggressively blue from approach distance. Blue in the way that meant water. Blue in the way that meant atmosphere. Blue-white at the poles, green-brown at the land masses, swirled with white cloud systems moving in visible rotation patterns that told the atmospheric analysts on deck that this planet had weather. Real weather. The kind of weather that required a thick breathable atmosphere and an active hydrological cycle. "That planet has been terraformed," said junior analyst Peth, who was 22 years old and had the habit of saying exactly what she was thinking before she had time to consider whether she should. Nobody corrected her. Sensor Chief Dara Voss pulled up the atmospheric composition readings and read them aloud in a voice that was trying very hard to stay neutral. Nitrogen-oxygen mix, 78 and 21% respectively. Surface pressure approximately 1 standard. Liquid water confirmed. Vegetation signatures, significant. Thermal signatures consistent with large-scale settlement. Population estimate pending but preliminary readings suggest. She stopped. "Voss," Kane said. "Sir, I want to recheck this before I say it out loud." "Say it now and recheck it after." She looked at him. "Preliminary population estimate is between 9 and 12 billion. The command deck was completely silent. 9 to 12 billion individuals on a world the registry had classified as lifeless. 9 to 12 billion individuals who had, at some point between 4,000 years ago and now, not only developed civilization but developed it to the scale of a full planetary society, with the technological capacity to terraform their own world, transmit across deep space on advanced frequencies, and apparently noticed the Velhari survey ship coming and wait patiently for it to arrive. "They knew we were coming," Thessaly said from her station. "It wasn't a question." "How long before we're in visual transmission range?" Kane asked. 40 minutes, sir." "Then someone get me a clean uniform," he said. "Because in 40 minutes we're going to have the most important first contact conversation in Velhari history, and I would like to not be wearing yesterday's duty clothes for it." They called themselves humans. The word was simple, almost startlingly so. One of the Velhari linguists noted privately that it was etymologically rooted in a concept meaning of the ground or of the earth, which she found philosophically interesting. The Velhari's own name for themselves translated, through 6 layers of archival language, to those who completed the counting. The difference between the two names said something, she thought. She wasn't sure yet what. The human who appeared on the transmission screen 43 minutes after Kane had requested his clean uniform was a woman named Elena Vasquez. She looked young, though the Velhari biometric systems were immediately uncertain about human age, flagging a note that the species apparently aged in ways the sensors hadn't been calibrated for. She was sitting in a chair in what appeared to be a very ordinary room. There were papers on the desk behind her. There was a cup of something warm and steaming near her right hand. There was a window behind her showing a blue sky day on what was, Thessaly kept reminding herself, a world that 4,000 years ago had no sky at all. Elena Vasquez smiled. "Admiral Kane," she said. Her pronunciation of his name was slightly off, the second syllable too hard, but the fact that she used his name at all sent a cold ripple through everyone on deck. They had not yet transmitted any crew identification. "Thank you for making the detour. I know 7 Tau 19 is not exactly on your standard survey route." Kane kept his expression neutral. He was good at that. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, a title he was assigning because someone had to have a title and she was the one sitting in the chair. "I have some questions." "I'm sure you do," she said. "We have some too. I thought we might trade." She picked up the cup beside her and drank from it, a small, unhurried gesture. "We've been watching the Velhari continuance for about 2,000 years. Not closely. We're not a surveillance kind of people generally. But when a civilization that large moves through your neighborhood often enough, you start to pay attention. 2,000 years, Kane said. Give or take. And you chose to say hello now. She tilted her head slightly. We chose to say hello when we thought the conversation would be interesting, she said. We weren't ready before. There's a difference between being able to speak and having something worth saying. Pause. We think we have something worth saying now. Which is? She looked at him for a moment, a direct, calm, unhurried look that several of the Velhari crew would later describe in their personal logs as feeling like being read rather than seen. The Drath are coming, she said. You already know that. You've known for about 60 years based on the intelligence patterns we've been able to observe. What you don't know, what your registry doesn't know, is that they've already moved. They left their staging system 14 months ago. They're not where you think they are. The silence on the command deck was total. Kane said, How do you know that? Elena Vasquez smiled again. It was not a boastful smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a long time to have this specific conversation and was trying not to let the relief of it show too much. That, she said, is the interesting part. Let the record show that the Drath were not monsters. This is important to say clearly because what follows might make them sound like monsters, and that reading would be wrong in a way that matters. The Drath were a civilization of approximately 40 billion, spread across 19 systems, with a history of expansion that stretched back 8,000 years. They were methodical. They were patient. They were, by most objective measures of civilizational development, remarkably successful. They were also coming. The Velhari had known about the Drath for a long time, long enough that the relationship between the two civilizations had calcified into a kind of cold formality that everybody on both sides understood to be temporary. The Drath expanded. That was simply what they did. Not out of malice, not out of ideology, but out of what their own philosophers called the logic of continuation. The idea that a civilization that stopped growing was a civilization that had accepted its own eventual end, and that acceptance was the one thing their culture considered unforgivable. They had absorbed 11 civilizations. Not destroyed, absorbed. The distinction was one that the Velhari found deeply uncomfortable, because it was technically more merciful than destruction and yet felt, in ways that were hard to articulate in formal diplomatic language, like something worse. The Velhari had been preparing their defensive response for 60 years. Fleet positioning. Alliance negotiations with the 3 mid-tier civilizations in the contested buffer zone. Resource allocation. The Grand Continuance Registry had an entire classified section, the only classified section in its entire 11,000-year history, dedicated to modeling Drath expansion trajectories and calculating the optimal response window. All of it was based on the assumption that the Drath fleet was still in their staging system. Show me, Kane said. Elena Vasquez reached off-screen and returned with what appeared to be a physical object. A flat, dark rectangle that she held up to the transmission camera. On it, rendered in light, was a star map. Simple, human-made, not formatted for Velhari display systems, but readable. The Drath staging system was marked. And beside it, along a route that nobody in Velhari intelligence had modeled, was a dotted line showing movement. They went wide, Elena said. Around the Karath Vale. Everyone assumes that route is too long, too fuel costly. Standard Drath fleet doctrine doesn't use it. She tapped the screen. But this isn't a standard Drath fleet. The composition is different. We tracked 17 ships we'd never seen before, heavy, slow, clearly resupply configured. They're not planning a fast strike. They're planning to stay. How did you track them through the Veil? Kane asked. Our own long-range sensors can't penetrate it. No, she agreed. But ours can. Another silence. Why? Said Thessaly suddenly from her station, then caught herself and looked at Kane, who nodded. Elena turned toward the sound of the voice. Why can our sensors penetrate it, or why are we telling you? Both, said Thessaly. The first answer is complicated and will take a while, Elena said. The second answer is simple. She set the star map down. Because we've been watching what the Drath do to the civilizations they absorb. And we've decided we don't want that to happen to you. Pause. Or to us. Thessaly Vorn did not sleep that night. This was not unusual for her during deep survey postings. Her sleep cycle had always been irregular in open space, something about the particular quality of recycled air on long-haul vessels that her body never fully accepted. But tonight was different. Tonight she lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about a question that had been sitting at the back of her mind since the first moment she'd seen the signal from 7 Tau 19. She was a cartographer. She had been a cartographer her entire adult life, the same as her mother and her mother's mother, going back 4 generations in a family that had given itself to the registry with a devotion that, if she was being honest, was not entirely different from the way some species gave themselves to religion. The registry was truth. The registry was the accumulation of what the Velhari knew. And the Velhari had built 11,000 years of civilization on the bedrock confidence that what they knew was, more or less, complete. 7 Tau 19 was not in the registry. Not accurately. Not truly. The registry had a notation there, a dry 4,000-year-old observation that had been entered by a survey crew who had looked at that system and seen nothing because nothing was obvious. Because the thing living in that system had been quiet. Had chosen to be quiet. What else had been quiet? She pulled up the registry on her personal console, not the classified sections, not the tactical files, just the ordinary, open 11,000-year-old public registry that any Velhari citizen could access, and she looked at it differently than she had ever looked at it before. Not as a document of truth. As a document of observed truth. As a record not of what was, but of what had been noticed. The difference had never seemed important before tonight. She began running a search. Class 0 systems within a certain radius. Systems that had been surveyed once, classified as lifeless and never revisited. It took the search algorithm about 4 minutes to return results. There were 11,412 of them. She sat with that number for a long time. Then she got up, got dressed, and went to find Admiral Kane. Kane was awake. Of course he was. He was in the small observation room off the main corridor. A room that was technically a navigation backup station but that the crew used informally as a quiet space, because it had a direct viewport that looked out at real, unfiltered space, and sometimes people needed to look at actual darkness rather than a screen rendering of it. He was holding a cup of something, the same posture Thessaly noticed with a small internal jolt as Elena Vasquez earlier in the day. She filed that away and didn't say it out loud. 11,412, she said instead. Kane turned. He didn't ask what the number meant. He was too smart for that. Class 0 resurveys, he said. Systems surveyed once, classified lifeless, never revisited. Some of them 4, 5, 6,000 years old. Some of them older. She sat down across from him. We have been assuming that the registry is current because we update it when we find new information. But we only find new information when we go looking. And we stopped going back to places we had already classified. Because why would we? Kane said quietly. We already knew what was there. We knew what was there thousands of years ago. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars were cold and fixed and gave nothing away. Are you suggesting, he said carefully, that there might be more of them? I'm suggesting that we built our entire strategic picture of this galaxy on data that is, in some cases, older than our current system of government. And we treated it as current. She paused. Elena Vasquez said they'd been watching us for 2,000 years. The Pale Reckoning survey was 4,000 years ago. That means for 2,000 years between the survey and the watching, they were there and we didn't know. And for 2,000 years after they started watching us, they were still there and we still didn't know. Because we didn't look. Because we didn't look. Kane drank from his cup. Set it down. Looked at the stars. The draft, he said slowly. If they're coming the way Vasquez says, if they're configured for permanent presence rather than a strike, they're not coming for a war. They're coming to stay. He paused. They wouldn't commit that kind of resource unless they thought they knew the complete picture. Unless they thought their intelligence was accurate. Thessaly saw it at the same moment he did. They're using old data, she said. They're using the same kind of data we've been using. Survey assessments. Intelligence profiles built on observations that are years, decades, maybe centuries old. He looked at her. The draft think they know exactly what they're walking into. They think they know every variable. Every civilization in this region, every resource, every potential obstacle. They don't know about the humans, Thessaly said. Nobody knew about the humans, Kane said. Including us. The second transmission with Elena Vasquez happened the following morning. Kane had prepared questions. Thessaly had prepared questions. The intelligence officer, a thin, precise woman named Coordinator Shanaveth, had prepared a list of questions so long that Thessaly had privately clocked it at 47 items and wondered how they would fit them all into a reasonable conversation. What none of them had prepared for was Elena Vasquez being the one to ask first. Before we go further, Elena said, I want to ask you something. And I want an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. She looked directly at the transmission camera in a way that felt, again, like being read. When you realized that the registry didn't have us, when you understood what that meant, what was the first thing you felt? The Velhari officers on deck exchanged looks. Kane said carefully, "That's a personal question." "Yes," Elena agreed. "It is." Pause. Kane considered. Then, because he was underneath the clean uniform and the Admiral's composure, a man who had earned his position partly through a quality that his own culture undervalued and called excessive transparency, he said, "Fear." Elena nodded. Like this was the right answer. Like she had needed to hear it. "Good," she said softly. "That's the correct response. Not because fear is useful in itself. It mostly isn't, but because it means you understood immediately what it meant. That your model of the galaxy was incomplete. That the thing you'd built your entire strategic reality on had a hole in it you didn't know was there." She paused. "The Drath won't feel that. When they encounter the unexpected, their philosophical framework doesn't have a category for fear of their own incomplete knowledge. They feel disruption. They recalculate. But they don't sit with the fear of not knowing. They skip past it to the next calculation." "You've studied them," Shanaveth said. "We've studied everyone we could reach," Elena said. "For about 800 years. Quietly. Another pause. "Here is what we believe. The Drath are not going to lose this campaign because they're outgunned. They're extraordinarily well-resourced. They're not going to lose because they're outmaneuvered, because they're excellent strategists and they've done this 11 times. They are, however, going to lose this campaign, if they lose, because they are walking into a region of space that contains a variable they have no record of, no model for, and no philosophical framework to process when they encounter it." "Us," Kane said. "Partly," Elena said. "But not the way you're thinking." She looked at something off-screen for a moment. Then back. "We're not a military civilization," she said. "I want to be very clear about that. We have certain capabilities because 9 billion people on one world need to be able to protect themselves, and we've had some difficult centuries in our own history. But we are not going to win this by fighting. That's not what we're offering you." "Then what are you offering?" Thessaly asked. Elena Vasquez smiled. The unhurried, unboastful smile. "We're offering to let the Drath find us," she said, "before they find you." Here is what the Velhari did not fully understand about the humans until Elena explained it directly, in plain language, over the course of about 2 hours. The humans had spent the last 800 years studying every major civilization in their stellar neighborhood. Not militarily. Not economically. Philosophically. They had built, over 8 centuries of careful, undetected observation, a comprehensive model of how each major civilization thought, what frameworks they used to process new information, where those frameworks were strong, and where they had load-bearing gaps. This had come, Elena explained, from a particular feature of human intellectual history. "We've been wrong a lot," she said. "Not occasionally, systematically, spectacularly, in ways that cost us enormously. We've been wrong about the shape of our world, the structure of matter, the age of our own planet, the nature of disease, the behavior of economics. Wrong in ways that entire civilizations of our own people built their lives on, and then had to rebuild when the wrongness became undeniable." She paused. "We got good at noticing the shape of wrongness. Not always in time to prevent it. But we developed an instinct, maybe, for finding the place where a system of thought is most confident and asking, what is this confidence built on? How old is the evidence? What would have to be true for this to be wrong?" She looked at Kane. The Velhari built the registry on the assumption that thorough observation, repeated across enough time, becomes equivalent to truth. The Drath built their expansion doctrine on the assumption that a civilization that has succeeded 11 times in the same way will succeed in 11th. She stopped. "A 12th time. In the same way. And you built your approach on the assumption that being unknown is a resource," Thessaly said slowly. "Yes," Elena said. "Exactly that. HFY. From now on I think about the registry differently," Thessaly said, not really meaning to say it aloud. "It was a personal thing, an internal thing, the kind of statement you make to yourself in the dark of a sleepless night. Came out anyway." Elena looked at her. Something in her expression softened. "That's all we're really asking," she said quietly. "Not to fight for us. Not to make us part of your empire. Just look again. At the things you were sure about. Look again." They came out of the Karath Vale 13 days later. Kane had repositioned the Undying Meridian in those 13 days on Elena's suggestion, to a specific coordinate that the humans had identified, a deep space position between the Vale's edge and the Velhari border that offered optimal sensor range and, more importantly, was on the exact route that the human tracking data predicted the Drath fleet would take. The fleet was larger than intelligence had modeled. Not enormously, the Velhari's error was in the single-digit percentage range, which would normally be considered excellent accuracy. But in terms of absolute numbers, even a small percentage error across a fleet this size meant several hundred additional ships. Shanaveth made a note in her log that she hoped nobody on the Strategic Planning Council would ask her to explain. What happened next unfolded over approximately 6 hours. The Drath fleet emerged from the Vale in standard formation, staggered column, lead scouts pushed forward, the slow resupply ships protected in the center. Every piece of it was exactly the formation their doctrine specified for a long campaign advance. It was, Kane thought, watching the tactical display, the formation of a civilization that had done this many times before and fully expected to do it the same way again. They crossed into 7 Tau 19's outer system boundary at hour 2. Their sensors would have found the planet immediately. What happened next? What Kane watched on the long-range feed with a sensation he would describe later, privately, as something between awe and grief, was the Drath fleet doing something it had, according to Velhari intelligence records, never done in 8,000 years of expansion campaigns. It stopped. The entire fleet, all staggered columns and resupply ships and forward scouts, decelerated to a full stop in the outer system. No weapons discharge. No communication signal to the Velhari border. Just stillness. What are they doing? Peth asked, in the small voice of someone watching something they don't have a category for. They're looking at a planet that their records say should be empty, Thessaly said. And it isn't empty. And their records are exhaustive and they trust them completely. She paused. And they don't know what to do with that. The Drath fleet remained stationary for 4 hours. Then it began slowly to retreat. Karo was not a Velhari word. It had no direct translation in the registry's linguistic archive. Elena Vesquez used it in the third transmission, after the Drath fleet had retreated to the far edge of the Karath Vale and stopped there, neither advancing nor returning home, sitting in the uncertain dark between known and unknown space like a mind that has encountered a thought it cannot finish. In our language, one of our older ones, not the one I'm speaking now, there is a word Karo, she said. It doesn't translate cleanly. The nearest equivalent is something like the pause before a person realizes they have been fundamentally mistaken. The silence between the last confident thought and the first uncertain one. It's not a bad moment in our understanding. It's actually considered, in the philosophical tradition that gave us the word, to be one of the most important moments a thinking being can have. Kane looked at the tactical display, where the Drath fleet still sat at the Vale's edge. They are in Karo, he said. Yes, Elena said. And the question, the important question, the one that determines what comes next, is what they find when they come out of it. They might come out of it angry, Shanaveth said flatly. They might, Elena agreed. That's one possibility. Disruption recalculated as threat, doctrine reasserted, campaign restarted with amended models. She paused. But they stopped. That's the thing. An expansion civilization that has never stopped. The Karo is happening. What we don't know yet is whether it will become something else. What do you want it to become? Thessaly asked. Elena was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating silence of someone choosing a diplomatic answer. The genuine silence of someone deciding whether to say a true thing out loud. I want them to find out that they are not as complete as they thought, she said finally. The same way you found out. The same way we find out every few generations about ourselves. I want the Drath to discover a Class 0 system that turned out to be full of life. Not to defeat them. Not to absorb them the way they've absorbed others. Just to show them the hole in their map. She looked directly at the camera. Because a civilization that knows its map has holes looks at the galaxy differently. And a galaxy full of civilizations that know their maps have holes is a very different place than the one we're living in now. Nobody on the command deck said anything for a long time. HFY, Thessaly said softly. From now on. The phrase she had used once before about the registry. She said it again now, and this time she meant it more broadly. About everything. HFY, we look again. 6 months later, the Velhari Continuance undertook the largest institutional revision in its 11,000-year history. It was called, officially, the Grand Continuance Registry Reassessment Initiative. The formal language was dense and bureaucratic and intentionally understated, the way Velhari official language always was, because Velhari official culture had a long tradition of treating dramatic things as though they were administrative ones, on the theory that drama invited error and administration invited precision. What it meant, in practical terms, every Class 0 system in the registry that had not been resurveyed in the last 500 years would be resurveyed. All 11,412 of them. It would take decades. The Velhari public, when the initiative was announced, responded with a range of reactions that the cultural analysts had not fully predicted. There was some anxiety, the natural response to being told that the thing you had trusted as complete was not complete. There was some bureaucratic resistance, which was always expected with projects of this scale. But there was also something else, something that showed up in public correspondence and social commentary and in the private logs of survey crews who had been assigned to the project before it was announced. Excitement. The word that had been filed under extinct emotional states, pre-unification era. It turned out the word for wonder had not been extinct. It had just been resting. Thessaly Vorn requested assignment to the reassessment initiative on the first day applications were open. She was given lead cartographer status on survey vessel New Reckoning. The name was her suggestion, assigned to a sector of Class 0 systems that had last been visited 6,000 years ago. She did not know what she would find. She was discovering the point. On the third planet of 7 Tau 19, Elena Vasquez sat at her desk on a blue sky afternoon, with papers spread around her and a warm cup near her right hand, and read the official Velhari announcement about the reassessment initiative on a small screen that had no business receiving Velhari public broadcasts at this distance, but received them anyway, because the humans had been quietly building that capability for about 300 years on the off chance that it would one day be useful. She read it twice. Then she set the screen down and looked out the window at the sky, that improbable hard-won blue sky, built over 2,000 years of slow and patient work on a world that a survey crew had once glanced at and found nothing worth noting. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Outside, in the middle distance, her colleague was calling across the courtyard about something logistical, something about transmission calibrations for the next contact attempt. There were 37 civilizations in the local cluster that the humans had been observing quietly for various lengths of time, and the list of which ones to reach out to next, and when and in what order and with what opening words, that list was long and complicated and regularly debated. Elena picked up her cup. The stars were already coming out in the early evening sky, the trinary suns of her home system setting in their staggered sequence. First the yellow-white, then the orange, then the small red one that took longest to go, painting the atmosphere in colors that had no names in any language but their own. The galaxy was very large. The maps had holes in them. That was, she had always felt, the best possible thing to know. Indeed.